Hey everybody, Ethan here from WordTech, and welcome to WordCast number 73. That is the second time in a row that I've gotten the number right, so I am again proud of myself. We've got a lot of interesting stuff for you guys today. It's going to be a little bit shorter than the last podcast because technical difficulties prevented us from starting for over an hour, but we think we have them worked out, so I'm sure whoever's watching this is going to know if we
In
have them
addition,
worked
it was
out.
also
But
a
anyway,
fairly light week except for the first topic, which is a pretty significant change, but it's also one of those things where stuff will have to play out. We'll have to see how it plays out in order to really know the full ramifications anyway. And
yes.
so going into only like a general detail explanation of it is fine anyway for this week. It's going to be an
Yeah,
ongoing
no,
discussion.
absolutely. And I mean, it yes. And it was a fairly dry week of anything major other than this. We have our second big section is just security, which is like, I mean, it's a bunch of little things that are considered one section. But then the rest of it is just kind of smaller little
Yeah.
tidbits here and there. So, a little bit of a dry week, but still a couple of important things to talk about, in particular this first one, which I will let Daniel, who I haven't said the name of yet, take
Yeah,
the lead on
so
that.
for those that haven't seen the feud between the President of the United States of America and Twitter, the social media platform that limits you to 280 characters, um, Trump and Twitter are not friends. Trump is a little mad at them because they fact checked the tweet of his. Now, we're not going to get too much into the general politics of it because this is a tech podcast. However, tech and politics are intertwined more than ever at this point and will continue to be so. So,
Well, yeah, and I mean, especially in the United States more than they used to be. I feel like other countries they were
yeah.
intertwined a little bit more previously, but
And in
now
addition
there's
to
just
that,
so
it's just going
much.
to grow more and more intertwined everywhere with AI, with deep fakes, with which we'll probably talk about next week, but like ever enhancing language algorithms like GPT, the third version, some details came out about. And so as this stuff becomes more of a big
Yeah,
deal, we're going to have to see how governments decide to regulate it and talk about it. Um, but there is something pretty fundamental to how the internet has worked so far, especially under US regulation, and that is Section 230 of the
yeah.
Communication Decency Act. This was a section written by two two people, a Democrat, our Senator Wyden, and a Republican House representative who I believe was from California, and I don't believe he's currently a um, don't believe he's currently in office. But yeah, so it was written bipartisanly, and the goal was to make it so that if you make a website that hosts other people's content, you're not liable for what they post. And that makes sense. That's how.
Which is important for like small time, especially. But I mean, in general, obviously that's important. But I feel like for small time stuff, that's
Yeah, I mean, it's
even more
fundamental to how
significant. You know what I mean?
everything from sites like Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube work to sites like local news outlets that have comment sections. Because while technically it's on the same site,
Yeah.
that comment section is treated as a platform because it's hosting other people's content. Um, and so
Right.
that has been a key thing in which if you post something on Twitter that potentially is um, so intentionally misleading against someone that a lawsuit could be filed, that lawsuit would be filed against the person that posted it, not on the platform. Without that, Reddit couldn't exist, Twitter couldn't exist, no site could host user content because you'd have to police literally everything.
And they can't police that hard. I mean, despite what some people like to think, the simple fact is that you can't do that level of policing even with
Yeah.
the best
And
machine learning right
in the
now.
context of what we're talking about
So
with this what we'll talk about with this change, if the goal is free speech, then we don't want them policing every single thing that gets posted on there. We only want them having to monitor and police the
yeah,
things that
yeah,
seem problematic. Um,
right,
yeah,
yeah,
so essentially
exactly.
what's
So
happening is Trump has signed an executive order targeting social media companies. Now, I read through the order. I am not a lawyer. Want to make that very clear that I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a whole lot of experience other than just reading some articles about Section 230 and about tech law. I do follow Wyden, who was one of the people that wrote this, because he is my senator, and so I have to decide whether or not I'm going to vote for him. And so what he does matters, and so I follow that. But outside of that, and other than when the topics come up, I don't generally pay that much attention to it. But I did read through the entirety of the executive order. The finalized one, not just the draft one, the finalized one was released today, which is, we're recording this on Thursday the 28th. So the order has been released, and essentially from what I'm, go ahead.
Um, I want to jump in here and just say also that I'm not a lawyer. I want to make that clear. And I also have not done the extensive research. I
Yeah.
did the security portion of the podcast. So I'm actually going to be learning kind of with you guys as Daniel talks about it. So everything that I say is opinion based on the information provided.
For reference, I think everyone should read the order. I feel like the first section is mostly just them setting up the legal grounds for why they think that this should stand. It's not really actual policy. So you'll notice that it's a lot more opinionated and a lot more like attacking Twitter and stuff like that in section 1. But once you get past that, that's where it more so goes into the policy changes that they are trying to achieve with this. And a lot of the
Okay.
policy changes are not actually policy changes now. They're more so directing other departments to look at policy changes, which means that the ramifications that we're going to see from this don't
Okay.
go into effect now. They won't go into effect for a while. It's going to be one of those things where there's going to be a lot of outrage now, and then things will die down, and then the actual changes will go into place, and then that's when the legal battles will start. Realistically, we're looking at least like 60 days before many of the actual even legal battles can begin in the courts, let alone,
It's kind of like
yeah.
net neutrality stuff
Um,
again. Like and not
yeah,
what this is, but the way it functions in
yeah.
terms of delays and stuff
So
like
one of the
that.
biggest things that this targets is the good faith section of Section 230. So Section 230 has a specific clause for how platform holders would handle deleting content or restricting access to content. And this is specifically, the idea is, if a platform holder is doing too much to affect the content on their site, then they're no longer a platform, they're a publisher, is generally the idea that they're trying to argue. And so specifically within Section 230, it only states that if they are deleting or restricting access. It does not state that you would be no longer applying with that good faith portion if you added a tag stating that something could be misleading and linked to another source as to how that might be misleading, which is what spurred all of this. And the good faith section, essentially, it would potentially put the FCC as the arbiter of good faith. Like, they get to then decide what is good faith and what is not. Whereas right now, if let's
Mm,
say you personally felt like, Facebook did something that was not within good faith of Section 230 against you in restricting access to your content, and you sued them, it would be then decided by the courts based on the context of the lawsuit. Whereas what this is doing is shifting the power, if it stands legal ground and actually passes, shifting power of what is
right.
determined as good faith to the FCC, which is the executive branch, which means the president. While the president wouldn't directly be controlling these, ultimately, especially as we've seen with this president, if they don't like a decision from someone, they'll just fire them and replace them. And so potentially, let's say in this case with Trump and Twitter, we'll keep it to the current context. If, let's say, Ajit Pai decided that Twitter did act within good faith, or just that within the good faith it didn't qualify for how the Section 230 rules lay out good faith, then he could just fire Ajit Pai, put someone else in, and then, because if this gets into effect, the courts will have already approved that the FCC can determine good faith, then he can just keep replacing people until he finds someone that will do that, at which point then they could sue Twitter, Facebook, whoever, in this case Twitter, and the courts will have already determined that the FCC can determine good faith, and therefore will have given up their ability to make that judgment in that time. That's how I read that, and that seems to me
So
to be a big shift of power from Congress, who wrote the bill, and the courts, who would currently uphold that, to the FCC.
okay, so So I guess two things that kind of click with me here is first that I want to just note that this, regardless of how you feel about the current president or anything like that, having that kind of power and that ability to replace people to make this kind of a change is already something
Yeah.
that nobody should have. So it's regardless of how you feel about any of it, it's giving an amount of legal power to somebody that shouldn't
Yeah,
necessarily
and
have the
for
power over
reference, real
that sort of
quick,
thing.
so this doesn't
And then the
affect the
second thing,
president's ability to get rid of someone. They already have that ability. My concern is that,
right? It's
yes,
just
when you're
because of where the
giving the
control is
power,
pushed.
taking it from the
Yeah.
courts and giving it to somebody that is under the control of the executive, you are then just giving the power to the executive.
Right, right. And then I guess my thing also is like the FCC doesn't
No.
need more control over this
And
stuff
what's
anyway. They already
interesting
have
too,
control over
I
too
would
much.
like to know what
So,
Ajit Pai really thinks of this, because Ajit Pai's whole thing since he got into power within the FCC has been making it so the FCC can't do anything. It seems like he got that job and was like, I don't want to do any actual work, so I'm just going to make it so the FCC has no power. And now they are putting an
right,
immense
right.
amount
Yeah,
of
yeah.
power and responsibility in the FCC's hands, because this would mean that the FCC would have to handle every bias claim for every website with any sort of user generated content. Tumblr, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Craigslist, local news outlets like KPTV for us. If I don't think, yeah,
That's
Yahoo.
so
Like
much
that
work,
is a massive bureaucratic undertaking.
as well as just
Yeah,
generally more control for the government over things on the internet, which is already a more significant
yeah,
issue than I think some people even realize, and it's something that kind of needs to be worked on. Is we like the abandonment
mhm,
of net neutrality and stuff is a huge issue, and we have
yeah.
seen ramifications from it, right? And
And so, like,
I I just don't I like the internet, at least for the time being, to be treated as a very low, very
yeah,
light regulation thing. And I feel like we're doing more and more. And regardless, this isn't the internet in terms of like obviously the infrastructure, but this is
yeah,
what is being run on the internet. And I feel like that is also an aspect when I say the internet, just to be
hmm,
clear, that's also an aspect that I feel like
yeah.
needs to be low regulation.
And
That's what I'm
realistically, like,
including that
there's
in
no
there.
way a service
Um,
that's like nonprofit like Wikipedia can operate under the risk of, if I go in there and edit Trump's page to say, Trump was the worst president ever, since he likes to say best, biggest, worst, littlest president. And if Trump
uh-huh.
then gets pissed off about the fact that I keep going back in and editing that, and he has shifted the responsibility onto the platform holder rather than the user, well then,
Yeah, then
well,
you're
for
not the one
one,
getting in trouble
yes,
for it. It'd
but more
be
so, Wikipedia would have to decide as soon as these rules go into effect how they're going to handle things, because if anyone can edit anything, or even just if most people can edit anything, and then if under the whim of, doesn't have to be this current president, it could be the next one, it could be the one after that, it could be 10 from now, but if under any future president or any future FCC commissioner, they decide, okay, we're going to say Wikipedia is now liable for the content that gets posted on their service, Wikipedia is done. Wikipedia
yeah, and they're
can't
already
afford to
hurting.
police stuff like that, and they would have to do it from the moment the policy is put into place, not from the moment that the FCC commissioner decides that they are no longer in good faith, because they need to ensure that they stay in good faith. So it's just a big mess for
Yeah, so
nonprofits.
that's already a big problem there because that's yeah, that's already starting to damage some of the,
Mhm.
the freedom of
Yeah,
information on the internet at that point. I mean, it's affecting things that it's not even
yeah,
directly supposed to be affecting, right? Again, like
mhm,
freedom of information, which has been an important thing on the internet. I mean, I feel like we have so many people today that are smarter because of the internet,
mhm,
and not just because they're interested in the internet, but things that are completely unrelated because of things like forums,
yeah,
things like Wikipedia and other wikis and stuff. And when you start placing that responsibility on the which I have total deja vu with placing the
yeah,
responsibility of stuff on the platform holder, because that has come up in other policies. You start to put these businesses and these
mhm.
sites in a really weird situation where they're not really capable of doing anything other than closing because they can't
And, like,
afford to
this
be
puts a
liable for that information.
huge, um, like a huge risk on so many things people don't think about. Like, yeah, sure, you'd expect everything that's like what you'd expect for user content like Twitter and Wikipedia and stuff. But like GitHub is user content. So if somebody decides to post some sketchy stuff on there hidden as code or anything, well, potentially the FCC could determine that they didn't act in good faith arbitrarily because it's now up to the FCC for some reason. And like GitHub could be at risk, Stack Overflow could be at
Yeah.
risk. It could fundamentally change software development inadvertently if 3-4 FCC commissioners from now they run into some weirdest situation. Like there's so many things that Section 230 has been monumentally important towards allowing to exist. It is the sole reason user content exists
Yeah.
on the internet. It is the only law that gives any protection for platform holders. And so any kind of change to it is something that needs to be done very carefully and thoughtfully. And instead, what's happening here is it's just being done arbitrarily by the president who didn't put the law into effect, so he shouldn't potentially be able to do it. That's the one thing, is that because of that, and the only reason I'm bringing that part up as it dives more into the politics side, is that it could prevent it from this executive order from standing. Because Congress passed the law,
Right.
and he is now changing definitions and changing how the law works under an executive action, not a congressional one. It's not like he's implementing
Right. Right.
new, unique regulation under executive order. He's changing a congressional act.
Yeah. Right. Which is yeah, okay. I'm obviously a
Yeah.
little bit
Let me.
wordless here.
Oh, go ahead if you have something to add.
I mean, yeah.
So
No, no, no.
something else I was
You
going to
go
say.
right ahead.
So some other things that make this kind of weird is that, like, as I was going through this, so some of the stuff is extremely concerning, like how it affects Section 230. However, some things don't even seem to really do much. Like they start to talk about how, and in fact, some stuff might give companies more power that inadvertently. So there's a section in
Hmm.
here about how some of this stuff, would just really like to kind of be exempt, not for like the Section 230 stuff, but for some of the stuff within this order, they would seemingly just have to
Right.
either give advanced notice about the changes, but they don't specify what would be considered adequate notice. So does that mean if Twitter wants to change their terms and conditions one day in advance, that's fine? Does it mean a month? They don't specify. But then it also states that
Hmm.
it would also be fine if they gave a reason to notice for like banning the content, which most every service does give you a reason, or they give you
Yeah.
some method of or ability to be heard is how it's worded, which to me seems like, if your concern is that like if you feel like you were banned invalidly and all that you have to do in order for that to be allowed, like for like let's say Facebook to ban people for whatever reason they want, is for people to be able to be heard and like contest that, well then Facebook's potential, like Facebook, for those that don't know, is creating something akin to a Supreme Court of speech on Facebook. And so the idea is
Yeah.
that whenever there is a dispute about something that happens on Facebook, initially it's just going to be bans. So in the initial cases, if there's a dispute about somebody getting banned from Facebook, it would escalate up to this Supreme Court of speech, as a lot of people are calling it. And so if all that you have to do to be able to ban people for whatever reason you want is have something like a Supreme Court of speech that you dictate the rules for, then it seems like it's giving Facebook a fuckload of power.
Well, I think that Facebook needs more power. They're too small
Yeah.
right now.
And so it's like
So I
that
think that's an
part
okay
just
decision.
didn't, I feel like, have enough information and needs to be clarified more, because if Facebook can say, oh,
Yeah.
we don't like this specific politician, we're going to ban everything about them, and we'll just say it's in our terms and conditions that we can do that. And like, as long as you escalate it to our court and our court says, yeah, it's in the terms and conditions, that's fine. Now, obviously, that's not something I expect to happen in that case, but I wanted to show an extreme example of how this could be used, because it's just weird how it gives
Yeah.
no further clarification, and it seems to just give an arbitrary power to social media. And it would give a lot of power to Facebook more than anyone else, because most places, like, yeah, Facebook can afford to do it. Google for YouTube could afford to do it. But like Twitter probably can't. Twitter's not very profitable, for those that don't know.
Well, and even then, I mean, the only reason YouTube would be able to
Yeah.
is because they're backed by Google.
Yeah.
They're not
And
very profitable either. I mean, a lot of these companies operate on
and so we
operate on
potentially
thin
are running into a
margins.
situation where you're letting Facebook dictate speech for the entirety of the internet. like
You know, I think
like
that's a good idea.
um yeah, it's such a weird mess. And like
Mark
personally for
Zuckerberg's a
me,
good guy.
like I do think that there are a lot of issues as far as like Facebook's power over speech. Like we've seen how they've done these tests for algorithms and been able to manipulate people into certain emotions by just changing the order of things within their feed, for example. That was something they did a while back, and like
Yeah.
this shows how much power they have, and they're using algorithms in really sketchy ways sometimes. But I feel like the solution when you have a monopoly over speech, because it's a private platform, is to break up the monopoly. Like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all owned by one
Yeah.
place, and Facebook is exerting more control over all of these social media platforms. So isn't the solution to just not allow one company to have so much control?
I would assume so, but
Yeah.
instead of just kind
And
of keep
like
buying other
a good
things
way
out,
to
I mean,
a good way to do
that's
that,
what the
even if you
company
don't want to break
does.
up companies, and this is something that's been discussed more and more, introduce data ownership. If I want to take my data that I had on Facebook and move it to another
Yes.
platform, that makes it a lot easier to move to a new social media service, which makes competition easier.
That is a big deal.
And
And that's what we want. We want more competition. I mean, in order to have
yeah,
the kind of open internet
like
work, we need a level of competition. And like there isn't right now. Like the only reason Twitter's successful is because it's a different
yeah,
kind of social media than Facebook. You know, we have alternatives to Facebook,
mhm.
and none of them are very big.
And like if
And
you're
it's just like
yeah, and if your concern
people
is
don't
like,
want to
let's say
move.
you are concerned that Twitter is banning just right-wing people. I'm saying that specifically because of the context of how Trump is talking about this. Well, there are
Yeah.
alternatives to Twitter, and if you are concerned about Twitter, well, how nice would it be if you and all of the other people that felt like they were being adversely affected could very easily take your data, migrate it to this other platform, and just be ready to go in a few clicks? Makes it really easy for a
Big
mass
deal. Very
migration
big
if a
deal.
lot of people felt that they were being oppressed. And then you know what that does? If you actually make it so that people own their data, and then you make it so that people, if they remove their data, that data can't be used to profit off of anymore, then it hurts their business. And so they're incentivized to keep all of their customers. And the way to do that would be to ensure that everyone feels like they are being treated fairly. And so you can incentivize fair
Yep.
treatment without also stifling the protections that make these services necessary or like operate. There are ways to do it, and data
Yeah.
ownership
Yeah.
isn't the only one. Breaking up companies isn't the only one. I just use those as examples because it's like instead of destroying the fundamental aspects of the internet, we should be looking at creative solutions to actually deal with the problem. This isn't dealing with the problem; it's just giving the executive authority to police internet speech, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not
Yeah.
attacking any of the root issues out
Um,
there.
Yeah.
I
And
just
then one last thing I want to
it
mention, there's
it
not really a
bothers me.
lot of details on this, but it's just one of those things that I read that was like, it kind of made me step back for a second because it's not something that I think is going to get talked about even among like policy wonks that are reading this to talk about policy on like a politics podcast or lawyers because there's not a lot of details right now. But
Right.
Section 5 was a little weird to me. So Section 5 of this executive order
Okay.
essentially gives, or it has the attorney general, a federal position overseen by the executive branch, create a group that would enforce potentially state laws pertaining to online platforms, but it also has that group write laws to suggest to states. And so it's just to me a weird thing where, like, and this is something that's not going to affect anything anytime soon, but we are essentially, if this law stands or if this order stands, asking the executive branch, the federal government, to write laws to suggest to states that if states implement, then the federal government would police and enforce, which is just weird because like that's not normally how state laws work.
No, no,
And
that's
it's
not.
also running into an issue of like there's a reason that a lot of state laws pertaining to internet are very limited, and that's because right now the federal government oversees anything that's between state lines. And so that's why, like, you have, for example, California, for those that don't know, has a law where if you can sign up for a service online, you have to be able to cancel it online. And that a lot of places that actually only will show up to cancel online if your account is set to be in California. But if you have the federal government enforcing state laws, then that just seemingly means that
Yeah.
the states could implement a law that would affect the entire nation because the federal government would dictate when they want to enforce it. And so we're running into another weird potential issue. Again, it very much depends on how whatever attorney general at the time decides to enforce it. But a potential issue where, like,
Right.
a state could implement something, like, let's say a small state, Rhode Island, could implement something that then overrides laws in other states because the attorney general wants to implement it, or it just overrides the lack of laws in other states, and then a tiny state could potentially affect the entire country in that way. Like, it's just a weird situation, and
That's
it's
just
something
really
that, like, I'll
weird.
do my best to keep an eye on, like,
Yeah.
specifically just anything that this group does, because I feel like everything this group does is going to be interesting to see potential ramifications. But it's just one of those things where maybe
Yeah.
nothing ever comes from it significantly, but it's just a weird potential power to be giving to the executive branch when it's seemingly supposed to be a state power. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. I don't know. I don't
It's
know
just
what I
such a
have to
weird
say
thing,
to
yeah.
add to it, but exactly, it's just so weird. Yeah, like I don't.
Yeah, it's odd.
Yeah, that's just odd. I mean, maybe nothing will ever come of it, or maybe people will talk about it enough that we can kind of
Yeah.
monitor it a little closer
Yeah.
to see if anything happens. But
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
it's
That's
one of those
weird.
things where, like, it just feels like a lot of this feels like they just gave such narrow explanations for things so that they had. Yeah, which
It's
just
a little
means that they are
vague.
giving
Yeah.
themselves more broad powers. Like, if they would have defined this further to specific things, then that would have made more sense and probably would have been fine. But to me,
Yeah.
it's when it's like this very vague definition in an order that is giving power to parts of the government, you're just then giving a broad power. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's weird.
um,
I don't like it. I don't like extra control being provided to the FCC because they haven't exactly been reliable. So that right there is
yeah,
already a
and
big red
it's
flag for
again, it's
me,
a really
right?
weird thing because the current FCC commissioner doesn't seem like he wants control.
No, he hasn't really done much. He kind of did his first few things, couple good, couple
Yeah, and I
horrible,
mean,
and
like,
then just didn't do anything.
when he
Like
did
after that,
the
he's
net
just been
neutrality
idle.
stuff, it was literally him saying, "We shouldn't police net neutrality. No net neutrality because we're not going to do it. We're backing off. Bye." Like, and that
Yeah,
actually
right,
kind of
right.
screwed them over because,
Yeah,
like,
that's a
if
good
he would
point.
have
It kind
said that
of
we're putting in certain laws or, like, putting in certain regulations pertaining to a lack of net neutrality, it would have required him to do more
yeah,
work, but it would have allowed it to stand better, which is good for us that he didn't. But it's just a weird thing of, like, he accidentally, like, hurt his own policy goal because he seemingly doesn't want to work.
yeah. That's really weird.
So,
I don't know, man. I I I I hope that so let me make sure I understand. Does this what is there that's going to potentially prevent this from becoming law, right? Is what are the hurdles that it has to jump
so
over?
the biggest thing is that ultimately any change to Section 230 being done via executive order is going to get fought because it's changes to a congressional law that was passed by Congress in a bipartisan manner.
Has that been done
I
with
believe so,
executive
but every
orders
time it
before?
gets fought and the whether or not it
Okay.
goes through is based on the context and the constitutionality generally of the original law, rather than
Okay.
the current situation. Like, Trump has used executive orders to try and change the Affordable Care Act, and some stuff has gone through and some stuff has not.
Right.
So it's very much context dependent. I don't really see, personally, with what I know of the law, how it would make sense for the court to say that yes, this executive order makes sense, because it's pretty clear cut how the law laid out broad protections for these businesses. And it's another one of those things where I feel like one of the biggest things the court would have an issue with potentially is that it's allowing the FCC to potentially be the arbiter of good faith rather than the court. And so then that affects every future lawsuit pertaining to anything like this too. So we'll see.
Right. Okay.
The actual final draft of the executive order just came out a couple hours before this, so it's really hard to tell. I'm sure within the next couple of weeks on WordCast we'll do another update with more details and with lawyers having gone through it more, and able to discuss it that way. I know that our Senator Wyden, again, one of the people that wrote the law, or helped write the law, he is obviously very pissed about it, and is already discussing the legality of this order. So we already,
notably angry is what I would like to say.
So we'll see what happens. It also may be possible that certain parts of the order are allowed to stand and others are not. It'll just depend.
Right.
I'm not going to get into court biases or anything, but just it's all going to be messy for a while, and potentially, if this all goes through, we could see some fundamental changes to the internet that could not be very good.
Yeah, mostly negative there, if not entirely.
So,
well, I personally hope it doesn't go through. I don't see a need for it. I don't see a benefit from it. I don't see an argument of the benefit from it. I just see a lot of
and it's like, again, it's one of those things where it's like there are issues at hand, but there are ways to deal with them that don't hurt every other aspect of the internet. And the fact that they are going straight to just the one that gives more power, seemingly pretty sketchy.
Yeah, I don't like that. Well, it's either sketch or lazy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one or the other, I feel like.
Yeah. And even if you agree with the current motives of the order, for anyone that's listening to this that, has that opinion, think about the potential future presidents and commissioners and how you want that power to play out, in addition to the ever-growing, continuing power creep of the executive. It's
well, I mean, just the government in general.
But again, like the
just
Congress already, they have a lot of power, but it's also really hard to get things through Congress. And Congress is a lot of people that all have that a significant amount of them have to agree upon something, whereas the executive is ultimately one person with the main control. And while yes, certain people have to be approved by Congress, you could also just fire someone and have a temp person implement the laws you want. And so that is, to me, of greater concern, where most of the power creep that we are seeing is not Congress giving them more power, because in reality they already have most power. They could, if unified, do most what they want. If they wanted to change the Constitution,
that's true.
If enough of them agree upon it and enough states agree upon it, there is already that power. But it's the growing power creep of a singular entity that changes all the time. Yeah.
Or like even a small
group.
And so
it's a running issue of whenever we look at power creep within the executive branch in specific, you have to think, okay, if I agree with the motives of this now, am I going to agree with how this could be used by somebody I disagree with?
Right. And to add to what you were saying about like having states approval and stuff like that, is that doesn't just diversify to a larger number of people that are required to approve of it versus a small tight group plus kind of all the way down to one person. But those people, the state people, are all elected, right? So they have people to answer to a much higher extent than the small cabinet around the president, whatever the president is at the time, right? So either way, it's just like, even if you agree with the motives of it, even if you think it's a good idea, it's not good to give the power in that way. There's other ways to deal with the problem that maybe take longer, maybe aren't as easy, but are going to do a lot better job of not damaging the internet.
Right now, if you think that Twitter is acting in bad faith, you can sue Twitter and have the courts then look at that situation. There is already currently a process, albeit a little bit of a difficult one, to try and handle those situations. And
well, the point is to be difficult, though, right? Like, you don't want it to be too easy. You don't want it to be up to one person. It needs to be something that's a decision. Like, there's a reason that things take time sometimes and can't be implemented right away or can't be changed right away, is because you need enough people to come to a conclusion that makes sense.
If enough people from one political affiliation, in this case, since we're talking about politics, if one political affiliation all came together and filed some kind of class action against Twitter stating bias, then the court is very likely going to take that up much faster and go through that much sooner, because it is a widespread freedom of speech potential issue.
Right. And that's kind of the idea, is power to the people, and the more people that are interested in a specific change or something like that, the more likely it is to be looked at, and the more power that group has, right? The bigger that group is. And so when you get enough people in agreement with a problem, it's going to be dealt with faster, and it's going to be, but it's going to be dealt with, hopefully, with some level of justice.
And then the other thing that I want to add to this, probably the last thing, since we do need to move on topic-wise, is one of the things that they argue in this is that social media services are like the public square, and therefore there should essentially be no dictation over the speech. However, again, not a lawyer, but pretty much every discussion about freedom of speech in every class I took about anything related to government was about how freedom of speech within the Constitution is specifically government retaliation and being arrested and whatnot for your speech. It does not affect anything with how private businesses do anything. And if you think that there needs to be some kind of restriction about how private businesses handle speech, because you think it's, they are essentially a town square as of now, the equivalent of that, then there needs to be new laws discussed about that, not trying to then essentially take a private business and say, you now fall under government laws that were never meant to affect private companies. Like, that's not something that seemingly should be able to be arbitrarily made with an executive order. And so that's really the last thing I wanted to add, is just like, they're really just trying to seemingly put the restrictions on how the government handles speech onto private companies without changing the Constitution, despite the fact that the First Amendment is specifically to how the government handles things.
Yeah, that's a little bit. That's a good point. That's a good point. I guess at that point we can transition into security, because that is also another problem when the government has too much control over your data.
And so the first thing we're going to talk about is a certain place doing ads a certain way.
Well, I was just going to straight up say the first thing we're going to talk about is porn.
I was trying not to get you demonetized, but you're good. You already did it. Actually,
I don't
never
care
mind. We talked about politics,
getting
so demonetized.
demonetized
Anyway.
Actually, yeah, that's a good point there. Hey, don't worry, some of the cutouts won't be demonetized.
No,
although
both of them definitely will be.
Both of them are going to be demonetized. Hey, look. The point of the channel is to have accurate and interesting information. The demonetization is not a problem, especially for the podcast. I care a little bit more about the main videos.
And I mean, it's not like right now it's bringing in
those just take
large sums of money.
No, this is true. We're still a small channel, but even then, I mean, even if it was, the podcast is something I'd want to keep more open, right? And I'm saying this like to everybody. Like, I'm not going to edit this out. Just to be clear, like, the regular videos may be a little bit more careful, because there is generally more work that goes into those, and there needs to be a higher level of discoverability on those versus the podcast, which doesn't necessarily need to have the highest discoverability, because once you grab people, they tend to stay with the podcast they like. So I'm totally okay with talking about porn on
Good,
this
because
podcast.
we'll have to
That's the
mention
point
it
I'm trying to
also later.
make. We will, yes. So this one was interesting. So this is kind of jumping into the security section here. And this is kind of security related. So Pornhub, uh, and the original source was reported by Bleeping Computer, but Pornhub figured out a way to have ads bypass ad blockers. Not in the way where like they say you have to turn off your ad blocker, they detect the ad blocker, say you have to turn it off or you can't access the site, but like literally displaying ads even with a good quality ad blocker in place. And there's a little bit more on that ad blocker specific portion in a bit, but the way it works is there's WebSockets on web browsers, and it's basically, to put it really simply, it's a different way of data communication to happen on a web browser, and it's not presented to the web request API in Chrome. And as far as I understand, this is true for Firefox too, but I didn't test that. So basically, what they're able to do is use WebSockets, which cannot be monitored the same way as other traffic because those are not presented to the web request API. The ad blockers, which use that web request API, can't see it, and so the ad can still be displayed. And so there was actually a screenshot, which I will put on screen, from Bleeping Computer, and don't worry, it's a censored screenshot, but it's a screenshot of Pornhub, and it shows, hey, you're using an ad blocker, buy premium if you want to avoid having ads, but then there's an ad next to it. And so it's kind of weird, and I just thought it was interesting, and the reason I put this in the security section was that it's interesting that they have this level of access, and there's so many different ways to bypass things. And I guess what I want to get at is just, I think some people don't realize how capable the web browser is of understanding what's going on your computer, and more on that in the next story. But it's people, people hear about these security problems all the time with web browsers, but maybe don't understand why the web browser is able to do this, right? It's just a website. Why is it able to do all these things? And obviously people also want websites to be able to do more, so that's why this direction has happened. But this is a good example of figuring out a way around something, which in this case was just a way around displaying ads. But what if it was a way around a security feature, right? When you have all these different aspects of a web browser, including things like WebSockets, it starts to become harder to secure because you have so many holes, basically. And I don't mean holes as in vulnerabilities, but points of entry. So anyway, kind of straight back to the WebSockets, though, is it auto triggers the WebSocket versions of the ads if it detects that you have an ad blocker. But what was interesting to me here is it's still reaching out to a site. And in this case, as far as I understand, and I did not straight up test this, but as far as I understand, DNS ad blocking would still work. Despite this WebSocket thing being in place. So if you're using a network level ad blocker like a Pi-hole, then you're still not going to have the ads. And that was interesting to me. Time and time again, it's kind of been proven to me that DNS blocking with a local DNS server is the best way to get rid of ads. And I feel like kind of everybody should do it, because you buy a Raspberry Pi and you run a couple of commands, and like literally with minor technological experience, after half an hour you can have a DNS level ad blocker set up on your network. It's really not that hard to do, and it's going to do a better job and use less resources on your computer because it's done on a network level and cause less issues.
I wonder how long until we get with one of the more powerful like consumer routers, like some of the like gaming routers that have a little bit more headroom as far as power to process things. I wonder if we,
the ones that are
I wonder if
needlessly
we end up
overkill.
seeing like, because you know how like sometimes they make like open source like software for them. I wonder if somebody ends up integrating something like Pi-hole into like just the open source software within like a consumer router, so that you could just like change it to that software and have it without needing to buy a Pi.
Well, yeah, I mean, Pi-hole's open source, so they could actually modify it so that the interface is part of your router setup, even on like a smartphone when you set up your router or whatever. Like, it wouldn't even have to be the full Pi-hole interface that you have to log into and like then have to change your router settings to point the DNS for every device on your network to the Pi-hole. It would just be like, okay, this runs on the router, and when you enable this feature, the router, which is generally used as the default DNS server, just goes through this pie hole filter instead. So you don't even have to make any changes.
Yeah.
You just kind of flip it on, and then, X website isn't working, so I'm gonna go open up my smartphone and add that website to the OK list. So there'd be a lot of interesting ways to do it. And just to jump in or not jump in here, but just to say, AdBlock Plus and uBlock Origin did figure out a workaround. It's kind of complex. I'm not going to go into great detail with it for lack of time, but they did figure out a way around it. So right now that is still blocked. That's not a way for other companies to push through this. But I still think it's just really clever how much work goes into making ads function, right? And so they're going to keep figuring out new ways to serve this information to you. And I guess over the time I've had a pie hole, time and time again, I come across things that I'm like, oh, look at that, another workaround type thing for ad blocks, and
yeah,
I don't have to worry about it.
Since we're talking about Raspberry Pis,
functions.
sort of, I'm just going to throw in something instead of having it as a separate topic because it's really not topic worthy anyway. Raspberry Pi dropped for the Raspberry Pi 4. There is now an 8 GB of RAM model for $75. Yep.
For $75?
And
a Pi 4? Okay, that's pretty impressive. So probably like $100
they're dropping
in a kit.
64-bit Raspbian. Yep.
Really? Okay, that's actually really, really cool too. Okay, I like to see that. That's awesome. Well, thank you for bringing that up. I need to buy more Raspberry Pis, more projects to do with them. So I have 2 Pi holes, but that's all I'm using them for right now. So I should probably start to do more. They're very capable machines. So now I did say we were going to jump into data collection a little more. So this one was really interesting to me, and it may actually not be directly malicious, but I still don't like it. So eBay has been found port scanning people's computers. Now, the network people here probably are already like, oh, that's not good. But for those that don't understand, so all of your connections on the internet from your computer are communicated through a port. And there are certain ports that are dedicated to certain things. And so by port scanning a computer, you can potentially determine what's running on that computer. So some people here may be familiar with like setting up a Minecraft server, which runs on port 25565 by default. Okay, and there is 65,536 ports or something like that. I always get that number a little wrong. But anyway, so there's a lot of different ports that can be used, but there are some that are either commonly used for a specific service or dedicated to a specific service. And so 25565, for example, if you see that port has traffic traveling through it on a computer, you can assume that person is probably using Minecraft and they're connected to a Minecraft server. So that's the kind of information that can be pulled from port scanning. And there's a lot more that can be pulled from it, which I'll get to in just a second. And eBay was found doing this on Windows machines, which is also another interesting fact. They were not doing it on Linux machines, and I don't believe Mac either, but I haven't seen a ton of testing around that. But it's confirmed that they do not do this port scanning on Linux machines, which is totally possible to do so. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it's harder to do that on Linux. They're just doing it on Windows. So for some reason, eBay wants to track this on Windows. And they are specifically scanning for basically just remote access ports, remote control ports. So things like TeamViewer, which is a common like remote control software that people use for like remote support and stuff. And so there's a full list of ports here, which I'll put up on the screen. But it's so the ports here are all but one of them some form of remote control. And that right there is what leads us to think that it's maybe not completely malicious. It's like they're potentially looking for bots. They're potentially looking for people that are trying, and this has been a significant problem on eBay for a long time, people trying to raise the bidding by fake bidding. They have an eBay account attached to a bot, large number of eBay accounts that are artificially bidding something up with the hope that the real person or the few real people that are fighting this bid end up spending more money on the product, artificially inflating the price. And so eBay may be here trying to track the computers that potentially are under a remote control scenario that may be being used as a botnet to do eBay price changing there and price gouging.
One
isn't
interesting
really the term,
thing.
but,
So in the list that you have, you mentioned like the top one, the 63333. Not sure what that is for. I was just looking up something, and it looks like it's for trip light UPSs.
Did you do
I literally
6333
just
or
copy pasted yours.
63333? Okay, because I did a little search on it too, but didn't find a ton. So that's interesting. I don't know why they'd be doing
Unless
that.
they're trying to figure out
And
like,
so just
because like yeah, that's what I'm
server
thinking. Because like
farm.
most consumers don't have UPSs, and so like if you
That's true.
detect
Yeah. Well, and especially not networked
exactly, yeah,
ones.
and
They'd
so
be
if you
through
detect
USB.
network one, that tells you maybe you should monitor that more.
Yeah, okay, that you know what, that actually is a good point. That may be the case. And so there's a lot here that actually seems like it may not be malicious. eBay may be really trying to do the right thing here. But it's still a couple things. First, tells you how much information can be controlled by port scanning your computer. Now, these are the ports they're specifically looking for, so it doesn't at least appear that they're collecting data on other ports, which they can certainly see other ports running on your computer. They're just looking for and
Yeah.
collecting the data in relation to this. And so it potentially is helping them prevent a real problem because using botnets and stuff like that to increase eBay pricing has been an issue. But there's a couple things that confuse me there. So they're not testing on Linux, and I wonder why they're not testing on Linux, because at least my thought would be that most of the bots that are being used for this probably would be running on Linux, other than computers that have been pwned with the remote access software. But maybe they just have another way of tracking for Linux, and so they're not caring about doing the port scanning, because the port scanning is just to help them determine Windows PCs that have been compromised. And with Linux, they have other things put in place to try and detect that it's a bot. I'm not sure. But there's a little bit more to this that kind of starts to bug me and rub me the wrong way, and starts to kind of go maybe a little bit against them trying to prevent hacking, as people would call it, or really just scamming, artificially raising the price of something via bidding. So what's interesting is they are kind of fingerprinting your computer by doing this. So they are not just checking for ports. There's actually more going on here. And credit to Lawrence Systems, and I can't remember his name, but the guy that mentioned it on Lawrence Systems' little video that he made about this. I'll try and link that in the description for you guys. What they're doing is they're actually tracking more information about your computer. So they are also investigating things like your local storage, and potentially putting little bits of information on your local storage and pulling that back later. But they are also doing things like tracking the window size that you're using, which potentially, if it's a computer that's been owned, it might have 50 windows of this open, all in little windows, right? To try and do this. And so they're tracking that. They're also tracking information like fonts and stuff like that, which generally on a headless system, which means a computer without a monitor, it doesn't actually have to draw screen, so it doesn't call those fonts. So if your computer's not calling fonts, then it's more likely that it's a bot. But then that starts to trigger me like, okay, maybe these are the things that they're hoping to detect Linux systems with. So I guess the port scanning is just for Windows, but they're not being selective about where they apply this other portion of what we would call fingerprinting. Because once you have the data of like what fonts are loaded on your computer, a little bit of information about your local storage, what window sizes you use, and what ports have things running on it, all of a sudden you have a really good set of information of, oh, okay, I see this computer, I know this is this person, or I know this is this computer that's visited us before. And it seems almost like, to me, if it was just to prevent hacking or scamming, that they would do the port scanning on Windows, but these other aspects would be more common to do on Linux. And it just seems kind of weird because they're turning off the port scanning portion for Linux. But as far as I know, they're still doing this portion here. So it's a little weird, and I just generally don't like a company having access to that kind of data. I don't want them to be recording it. And so that's what bugs me, is just they can figure out so much about your computer, and they can track you, and they're tracking you accurately, and this is without a cookie. You know, you can have cookies disabled. You don't need to have a cookie from eBay for them to know who you are and know that you've been to the site before. There's just so many data points, right? Because like this is just a small portion of the data points that they can get. They obviously can get information about what OS you're using, what web browser you're using, what IP address you have, all this other stuff. And so, you know, it starts to allow them to really build a picture of who's visited the site before and what they're shopping for. And maybe they can use the data to do marketing, you know, and maybe they can sell the data for ad agencies. But
make that money.
either way, I don't like that.
And this
Gotta
is
make
why
that
we
money.
need to
And
be
I mean,
able
I feel
to
like
own
eBay
our data and control when companies have access to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree. I would rather have that data be property. There's no reason that somebody should be able to, come by my house and, like, come inside and take pictures of my house and
Mhm.
make copies of photographs I have in my house
Yeah.
and walk away and
Yeah.
be okay with that, right? But they can do
And
that
it's
on your
like,
computer just fine.
people make
That's
the argument
okay.
like, okay, well, a lot of products are free and you are the product, therefore, like, you are essentially paying for it with that. But, like, for one, in the cases of the services that are free, there's a reason that Facebook is making a fuckload of money because they make a lot of money off of the ads. They are an ad company who uses social media to mine data
Yes,
to sell ads. Same thing with Google, where they make a lot of money. You know
exactly.
what social media services don't make a lot of money? Twitter, who can't really make as much money from ads. There's a reason for that.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the other thing is, the argument of, oh, being able to own your data, you know,
mhm,
like you said, like you are the product kind of thing, is just because you own your data doesn't mean you can't give other people permission. I can
yeah,
let anybody in my house, right? And so it's like you can own that data legally, but you can be like, okay, well, in order to use a Facebook account, we have to have access to your data and use this data. And you agree to, hey, yeah, you can use my data. It's my data, not your data, but you can use it. And if I don't want you to continue to use it, I have to cancel my account, but I get
yeah,
my
and
data
you
back. You
can't
don't get a
keep
copy
using
of
it
it.
to
And
target
so, like,
ads on other sites. If I show up on another site, you have to give me untargeted ads.
right, exactly. It's just that data is completely wiped. You don't have backup copies or anything of it. That is my data. I gave you access to it, and then I
Yes.
said, never mind, I don't want you to have access to it. I invited you into my house. I was okay with you being in my house, and then I kicked you out of my
Yeah.
house because you broke a rule, and you can't come back into my house until maybe I
Yeah.
forgive you later and I let you back in my house, right? And so it's like thinking about it like
Mhm.
property, I think helps people understand why it's important and that you can still get these
Well,
free
and then
services
a
that are
service like
free because you're
eBay,
paying with
they're
your data.
making money off of transactions. So they're making money off of transactions
Mm-hmm.
while data harvesting you to target ads for the paid ads on their site, while also being able to target you, knowing what stuff you're more likely to buy, to trick you into buying things that you otherwise might not have if they didn't time showing you that listing at the right time. And so,
Right, right. And they can use this data to
yeah.
target you with
And so
Google ads
there's
and stuff too, of course.
And there's
So they can
these
target
all
you
these different
elsewhere.
ways that they can gain additional money off of you, despite the fact that their revenue is not ads, or their core revenue is not just ads, it's selling products. Like, that is what they are.
Yes, yes, right, exactly. And so I guess this all kind of stands to just show just how much these companies are able to do. And again, maybe eBay really isn't using this particular port scanning and stuff maliciously. Maybe it is just to prevent scamming. That's possible. And maybe they're going to
Mhm.
release a privacy policy update or something, or it's already in there that talks about it. But the point is that there's, you can not be signed into anything, not opt into anything and watch a YouTube video on,
Mhm.
cars, and you get advertisements for cars on newegg.com or not, or I don't know if Newegg has ads, but you get the point. And so like they're tracking you without consent. They can figure out, okay, it's this person using this computer because we were able to fingerprint their computer. We know it's this computer, and the person that's used that computer
Mhm.
before is interested in cars. Um, and so it's like this lack of consent, right? That's what bothers me about it, and I don't like eBay doing it, and I shouldn't be, you can't punish me for wanting to use services like remote access services that are, normal. And I like, what is eBay going to do with this if they see,
Yeah.
TeamViewer running on your computer, right? Like, okay, maybe TeamViewer's running on their computer and somebody's helping them, like walking them through how to purchase something on eBay. You don't know
Mhm.
for sure that it means they're a bot. So I don't know. I don't know how useful it is, but oh well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we can jump into our tinier topics now. And this one is kind of exciting and almost enticing to me, but I'm probably not going to do it since I'm replacing the G7 that I'm
Yeah,
filming on right now. But
so Sony
um,
has unveiled a new camera. Now a lot of people use Sony's
yeah,
RX100 for making YouTube content, but it's not really made for that. It is more of a photography camera, and it's missing a lot of things that are really
mm-hmm.
helpful for, especially for vloggers, who are a lot of the people that buy those types of cameras. General vloggers, who haven't been doing it for a long time might want better quality than a phone can offer, but aren't ready to go full, interchangeable lenses, or maybe just don't need to for the type of content they're making.
Well, especially for the size, right? Like even mirrorless
Yeah.
cameras with interchangeable lenses are huge, right? Like a Panasonic G7, its quality is kind of similar to not the newest RX 100, but like 1 or 2 gens ago, the same generation as when this was out, and it's cheaper, but it's bulky and hard to do
And
that
so
kind of
this
work
camera that
with.
they've announced, the ZV-1 camera, is specifically made and designed for vloggers, which is very interesting. It's literally a cheaper vlogging-focused RX 100. It's not made with the same, like aluminum build and everything. It is more plastic and more, cheaper materials. But an RX 100 is like
Yeah,
$1,200. This camera's starting price is $800. However, until June 28th, if you want to buy one, they're giving you $50 off. Um,
which is kind of
yeah,
weird for a brand new
I think it's
product.
because they want to,
A little abnormal.
rather than sending out a whole bunch for review units, which would cost them a bunch of money, they want to get people to buy them because, like, the people
Yeah,
that they're targeting this camera at are the people that are going to talk about it anyway. And so instead
that's
of
true.
just
That's a good
sending out a
point.
bunch
Yeah,
of review
yeah,
units,
it's a
you
good
give a little
marketing
bit of a
strategy.
discount to get people to buy it right away that can't afford it, and then they'll talk about it because that's what the
Right,
camera's
right,
for, is to make videos. And so I think it's a
right.
pretty smart marketing strategy.
Okay,
Um,
I think
so
so. Yeah,
yeah,
and it really is
so to
enticing.
talk about it, so it's 4K 30, as well as 1080p up to 960 FPS. Now, obviously, it's not going to be the best quality
I was
1080p when you're doing
surprised.
that high a frame rate, but
Yeah, well, you're gonna get some rolling
yeah,
shutter and
but
not great
like,
light,
damn if having that
but
ability isn't nice. Like, because you have 240,
yeah,
480,
yeah,
960, and so having that flexibility where if you want to do like an outdoor slow-mo shot and you don't really care about the quality dipping for that because you want to do really low or really slow motion, that's just really nice to
yeah.
have. And normally you'd have to spend a pretty good amount of money to get 960 FPS on something.
And with the right light, I mean,
Yeah,
it can probably do decent quality,
yeah.
especially up to like the 240
And
range.
then so that
So
the 4K 30 quality should be pretty comparable to the RX 100, which is good because the RX 100 is pretty good video quality. It also
yes, yes. I think they're the same sensor, right? I
I
assume they're the
believe
same
it's the same
sensor.
sensor as the RX 100 Mark V, not the current one.
And are
I,
we? Do
I
we have
think
the
it's the
Mark
Mark 7.
6 right now? Is that what we're at?
Yeah. I
Wow, man,
know
those
that,
go
so the
by
next feature I'm
fast.
gonna talk about is it includes a built-in ND filter, which is huge. Um, that's a nice feature to have in
Wow.
a cheap camera. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's a big deal. Neutral density
yeah.
filters are
And it's,
incredibly
it
important, and
is
I
the
need to get
same
one.
ND filter that was in the RX 100 Mark V, which I think is the first RX 100 to start using those built in. Um,
So it's kind of almost like a tweaked
yeah,
RX
it
100
is
Mark
pretty
V
much
in
a
some ways
RX
here.
100
Yeah,
for vlogging. And so another one of the big changes that's really
interesting.
going to help vloggers is currently on the RX 100, the camera isn't one of the really nice articulating ones. You have pretty limited movement on it. Whereas on the
Yeah,
ZV-1, it's a fully articulating camera. And what's really cool is that the camera turns on when you pull the screen out. So if you want to record
yeah,
something, you
yeah.
just
It's
get the
nice. So
screen
you just
ready and it's ready to record. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I appreciate
And
that about
then
it. I
there
do. I
is
do.
also, and this is not found on the RX 100 or I think most any of Sony's cameras, there is a front-facing recording indicator, a red light that you can turn off in the settings if you don't want that on for the types of videos you're doing, or if you're recording like multi-camera setups and you don't want the light to glare on something. So you can turn it off. However, like if you want to record from the front, you can see and make sure that it's recording. So that's really nice.
Yeah, yeah.
The microphone is specifically built to be for recording it like vlogging style. So where's my phone? If you're holding your camera this way, the microphone is specifically made to record audio from directly in front. And and
I
it
like that
includes a
about it a
dead
lot,
cat in
actually.
the
I think that's a
box
great feature.
to pop on the top to help with them.
Yes, yes. And it is a
Yes.
it's directional. So like it attempts to eliminate all background noise and just focus on the
Yeah,
subject
I
within the
was.
center of the camera. Which is good
Oh yeah,
regardless
for
of if you're
sure.
using
Yeah.
it as a vlogging or just a
I was
regular
watching
camera.
Sarah
So,
Dietschy's video
yeah.
about it, and she had her air conditioning on behind her, or like essentially behind the camera,
Okay,
and you
yeah.
couldn't hear it. And that was without the dead cat on. It was just with
That's
the camera,
awesome.
like you couldn't hear it. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the dead cat's gonna help with wind noise, so I guess
correct. Yeah.
outdoors would be a
Yeah.
better test for that. But
So
still,
that's
yeah.
really cool. It's got a button on the top to change the depth of field, which is dope. And it changes it optically.
Yeah, I liked
It
that a
is
lot.
not
I
like
thought that was
software
amazing.
tricks like cell phones do. It's changing it optically. It's adjusting the depth of field. Yeah, the f-stop.
F-stop, right?
Um, and so
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
very helpful
yeah.
for ease of use and quickly being able to kind of get different types of shots. And in addition, um, it's got a feature called Product Showcase. So for those that don't know how most cameras handle autofocus, they try and if there's a face detected in a lot of these newer, like the RX100 and stuff, they try and prioritize focusing on eyes. And so if you want to record a product, I'm going to use beauty YouTubers as an example. If you want to hold your makeup up, it generally won't focus on that. However, this has a setting that you can turn on and
Yeah.
off to put the product up in front, and it will know to focus on the product. And then when you put it away, it pulls away. And the autofocus on this is very snappy. Very snappy.
I noticed
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that was really impressive. And that's actually like I think people
Yeah.
kind of forget how important that is sometimes. So like my Panasonic G7, obviously like I do everything manually on it. I have a camera rig for it. But when I first got it,
Mhm.
I tried to use it with autofocus, and the autofocus is so atrocious on this. And I mean, let's be honest, Panasonic's never been that great at it anyway, but the G7 in particular has horrible autofocus. You have no idea how much of a hindrance that is to workflow and content quality when it's not working right. And so having good autofocus, which Sony has been good at for a long time, is great. But then being vlogger specific is starting to add even more to that, even better, more value for just YouTubers. That's not just a thing that vloggers do, right? It's like and talking head videos, which I guess are vlogs, but not
and
really,
then another
right?
really helpful feature for vlogging is it has a exposure mode that is not common in cameras, where it prioritizes keeping your face exposed. So if you're walking down the street vlogging and you walk under a bridge and the lighting changes, it will make sure that your face is
Mhm.
what it's focusing on exposing rather than the scenery around you.
Which is really important because a lot of
Yeah,
photography focused cameras
yeah,
do the
they go
latter
for
of what you said
the
there.
average
And
exposure of the image rather than any specific thing.
yeah, and I feel like this is, it's not literally the first time, but it's the first time a big camera company has made something that is not just form fitting for vlogging, but is like technically oriented
Yeah,
towards the small
at the
creator, I
higher end,
feel
I think
like.
we've seen some like
Whereas,
$200-$300 cheapo video
yeah,
cameras earlier on in YouTube that people had made that were for YouTubers, that were very good because they were cheap ass
yeah,
cameras.
yeah. Right, right. And then like you've always had this like you've seen this kind of downturn in pricing where you can get really good 4K video quality out of a camera that's not that expensive, but
Mhm.
you have to really know what you're doing. It's not meant for this kind of quick style YouTube. And like I like that. I like doing cinematography. But some content
And
creators just don't want to do that. That their goal is to do content. They don't care about why the video looks good or how to
yeah,
make it
and
look
for a
good. It
lot of
just needs
people,
to look good.
I mean, like for like especially for like travel vlogging or not travel vlogging because I guess you would want scenery and stuff, but for like vlogging where you're doing a lot of like walking around the city when you're vlogging, you don't really care about most things other than that you look good.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure knowing Sony, most of these settings are probably disabled. Like you can
Yes.
disable them.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna do a scenery type thing, you just turn off
Yeah.
the face priority exposure, right? Now I'm hoping, and I know there's been some reviews of this, but I haven't seen any super deep dive reviews yet from some of the camera professionals. I am hoping that they also have some of the like quick settings and like memory ability so that you can toggle between like, okay, here's my profile basically for vlogging.
Yeah,
Here's
that
my
would be
profile
nice,
for
yeah.
doing more scenic shots. So we'll see, because I like, and it probably won't be on the dial itself, but like just to be able to have some kind of
Yeah.
profile switcher would be really nice. That's something that I would actually like to have on my current camera.
Hmm.
Is just something to quickly change between I'm filming
Yeah.
indoors, I'm filming
And
outdoors, that kind
then
of stuff.
the last feature I wanted to talk about on this, coming later this year, about they estimate summer of this year, they are going to be releasing an app to allow you to use the ZV-1 as a webcam as well. And so you're essentially looking at a situation where you could, buy this camera for $750 and have a really excellent
Yep.
vlogging camera with a mic that's actually usable outdoors and have it be better than any consumer webcam. Yeah.
It's pretty
And
awesome.
then
Yeah.
in addition to that, they're not the only ones that
So
have that, using your camera as a webcam over USB feature. Canon already has that for Windows, and they have just
yeah.
released the Mac version. So that's some news I wanted to add, so that you can use it as a webcam for Mac.
Oh, I didn't hear
And
about
then
that.
in
Okay, that's
addition to
awesome.
that, Fujifilm just released their app to be able to use their cameras as webcams too. Yeah.
So at least some people are
Yeah.
trying to
Well,
do it. Some
I
companies are
think a
trying to
lot of
do it.
people
That's
realize
that's a
that at
big
this
deal.
point, price isn't the reason some people can't get webcams. Like, $300-400 webcam, who cares if you need it for work? Well, if there's no webcams available, but there's a camera available, you might buy a camera if you can use it as your webcam.
Yes. Yes, and that's probably also why the
Yes.
Elgato Cam Link's sold out
Yeah.
right now. Lots of people
Yeah.
doing lots of camera
Um,
content.
and then for our
And
next
yeah.
topic, so the first alpha build of Steam for China has been released. This is literally a alternate Steam version being built for China specifically. And there's three distinct
Yeah.
differences so far from the current United States, European, everywhere else version of Steam. Um, so the first one is that when you launch a game, there is a healthy game advisory, and some of the stuff is about how it advises you not to play games too long, things like that. Actual like healthy gaming advisory stuff.
Well, the
Yeah.
kind of stuff you see Nintendo
Well,
do a lot of times. Yeah.
Japan
Yeah.
has a lot of regulations around healthy gaming anyway, and so most any Japanese game has this stuff in
Right.
there because
Yeah.
they already have to build it out for Japan. Um, but the
Yeah.
thing that stood out to me that was interesting, I'll say, about this, very odd and concerning, is that it literally tells people to boycott harmful games. And rejecting game piracy, I get why China wants to put in there, and I get why even Steam would put that in there. But you literally have Steam telling people to boycott games. It's weird.
Yeah. That's not good.
Yeah,
It's just
it's
weird.
it's
Yeah. I
something
don't know.
it's
It
something
seems like a
likely
weird
that
thing to be in
China
there.
wants, is boycott harmful games. If you're telling everyone to do that and someone doesn't, and then someone plays a harmful game that the Chinese government dictates is harmless, then that might affect their social credit
Yeah.
score. So,
So yeah, social credit score. We should get
I
one of
mean,
those here in America,
I'm
right?
not going to get into it. Because like we kind of currently pretty much could already have one without people really realizing
Yeah.
it. Um,
Yeah.
The
Yeah. That's
other
true.
thing, so the current build will not allow you to set custom profile pictures or even profile names, because supposedly the pictures and names,
Uh huh.
while you can upload them, they have to be approved by a government agency before you can use them.
That's just weird. Manual approval is
Well,
just
it's because
weird.
something like, for example, with everything that's going on in Hong Kong, you could potentially see a bunch of Chinese users who are sympathetic to Hong Kong, or
Oh.
even Hong Kong people, now that they essentially have to follow Chinese law. Um, you could see them in protest set their profile pictures to umbrellas, for example, or Winnie the Pooh, or these other images that
Mm.
China dictates are bad, like cartoon characters and umbrellas that protect you from the
Yeah.
rain.
Right.
Um,
And they like to prevent any
Yes,
form of
and
uprising or
so that's
anything.
why that's there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, and this follows, or this makes sense in that it fits in with Chinese existing guidelines on gaming. But certain users, based on their age, have certain restrictions based on what games they can play in certain hours of the day. And so one of the examples is, if you're under 18, you can't play CS:GO at 10:30 at night or at 5 in the morning, because under Chinese law,
Yeah.
Certain games you can't play if you're a minor between 10 and 8. So
It's interesting. It's interesting. Well, I don't know. I guess I'll say that I kind of hope. Well, I'd like to say I hope that something
I mean,
is done
nothing
about this,
really,
but nothing will be.
other than dictating
So
that like
nothing really can
like
be.
unless the U.S. government was like, yeah, you can't operate in China at all, nothing can be done.
Right. Then at that
Yeah,
point, they want the money, which I mean is understandable. I mean it's what they're doing is following a law, but it's not like them not being there changes
correct.
that law.
However, there is something interesting in that.
So
Right now, with the way everything is in China, roughly 30-ish million people do have access to Western Steam, and China's a very big country, over a
oh
billion people. But
yeah
this is likely going to restrict or lead to them losing that access, which is going to hurt. Specifically, one of the big concerns I've
yeah
seen discussed is Chinese indie game developers are going to have to then go through this. Like right
oh
now, they can kind of sidestep some things by uploading on Western Steam and having people that have access to that
right
buy those games through that, and they're gonna just that's gonna be done when this
yeah
drops. Yeah.
that's gonna be
So
axed completely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that sucks. I mean,
yeah,
glad I don't
yeah.
live there, man. I'll say that the state of all things internet there are very disappointing. Um, so I guess at this point we're gonna jump into our tiny news. So I had to do that time. So we're gonna jump into our tiny news here. So these will be kind of quick topics here. There's actually not a ton in here because, like I said, it was a little bit of a dry week. But I guess to start, YouTube's new chapter feature. Speaking of Pornhub earlier.
Yeah. So for those that oh, I'll just say this. So YouTube has introduced a new chapter feature, and what this is, the TLDR of it is that it's essentially like a lot of YouTubers put timestamps in the description or in the comments of their video. It's just a way for them to integrate that into
Mm-hmm.
the actual like timeline of the video. So when you're scrolling through the video, instead
Yeah.
of just scrolling to a time, you can move your mouse along, and if the YouTuber has set up these chapters, then it'll show you like the description of this portion of the video. So like in the case of something like a podcast, you
Mm-hmm.
might see we probably wouldn't go as granular as individual topics within Tiny News. But for example, if this podcast, if we do it on
Yeah.
this, you could have a Tiny News section that you could quickly scroll to skip to. And so like let's say
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. Which we may end up actually throwing that into WordCast. I never did the timestamps in the
yeah.
description. It takes up too much space. But
And it's
may do
it's
that on
nice
the
because
timeline
like
here.
for
I think that
example,
makes
even if
sense.
you don't normally care about skipping between parts of videos, you could have a situation where YouTube doesn't always
Yeah.
save your place in a video, especially switching between devices. And so if you're watching a longer
Yeah.
video, well, you could try and time out when you're going to stop watching the video based on the end of a chapter. And then it's really, really
Yeah.
easy for
Uh-huh.
you to get back to where you want to go. Um,
Yeah, I appreciate that, especially when
yeah.
YouTube's
And the
just
reason we
horrible at remembering
mention
your place in
Pornhub
so
is
many
for
things.
those
Oh
that
man.
don't know or don't use the service, Pornhub has essentially had this feature for a while.
Yeah. So they I actually I can't remember Pornhub's parent company's name, but I want them to come out with a YouTube competitor because I feel like they're the only one that has
And
the
I mean,
infrastructure to
they've
do it.
created a lot of features, or Pornhub has, that YouTube has then copied. For those that also don't know, the
Yeah.
thumbnail, like when you put your mouse over the thumbnail and it shows a preview of the video, that was something on Pornhub for years before YouTube
Uh-huh.
had it. So,
Yes, yes, it was. And Mind Geek
of
is the
course, that's the name of
parent
that
company.
company.
So yeah, Mind Geek.
So,
Yeah. So it's cool. I'm glad YouTube's getting it, but it's just kind of funny because sometimes I feel like YouTube just isn't doing
yeah.
a lot of innovation anymore. But whatever, I guess. I'd still like to see higher bitrate
Yeah,
on
that's
YouTube. No, it's not. Well, it's just like they have these resolution selections, but it's like these don't mean anything to me. I'd rather have a bitrate
Yeah.
selection option as well. You know, like if they could like do like tiering where like your account is set to the high bitrate mode, and so when you select 1080p 60, it uses the higher of like 3 bitrate options. So you're not having to select it for every video, but you can set it like per
So
account kind
the
of
thing that
thing.
I feel like
So
is
I
the
don't know.
case is that YouTube, Twitch, Netflix, all of these services, yes, they have the issue of their cost for bandwidth, but they also have the issue of
Yeah.
consumer data caps that they have to balance. And so even if they're willing
Yes.
to
Yes.
charge more for the service, or they're willing to eat the cost themselves, the issue is that, unless YouTube is like, we've detected you're using Comcast. Comcast has data caps in some areas. Contact Comcast before using this higher bit rate. People aren't
Yeah.
going to read that shit. They're just going to click the higher bit rate because it'll look better. And then they'll get
No,
charged
you're right.
overages, and then
Yeah.
they'll call
Yeah. Which
Comcast and
is
be like, "Why was I charged?" They're like, "Oh, you used YouTube a lot. Oh, I'm gonna bitch at YouTube."
yeah. Yeah, no, I get that.
And
There's a
I
balance
know
there. I don't know.
exactly
That's
how
just something that
consumers handle
frustrates
that
me about
because
the
I
state
used
of
to work for a
internet.
call center for Sprint, and I know exactly how people would bitch about their overages.
Yeah, and it's just like I wish that overages weren't a thing. It was a little more understandable on wireless carriers,
Yeah.
but especially for regular ISPs, and now with wireless carriers, it makes me mad because it's actually limiting the
And, like,
ability to do
you and I
certain
have
things
talked
on the
about this
internet that are just
too,
super
but,
cool.
like, the way I've always seen it, especially for wired, is, I mean, and wireless has pretty much already been in this situation. Either charge for the
Yeah,
bandwidth or charge for the amount of data. Don't charge for both.
yeah,
Mobile has given you the best
agreed
data that
completely.
they
Yeah,
could based on the capacity, but you've had data caps. That's fair.
hmm
That if you're gonna have data caps,
yeah,
that's how you do it. You just let people use the internet as much as they
yeah.
want. The data cap is their incentive to not use too much. But
Right, you're
yeah,
letting the consumer
but when
self-regulate
they're
it or
using
pay
it, they're
more.
getting the
Yeah,
best
yeah.
available that the network can provide. Whereas with Comcast, for example,
Right,
with the
totally.
data caps and with speed, I am paying for gigabit internet. I'm paying more to get faster internet, but I'm still limited on how much I can use because if I use my gigabit internet a little bit too much, I pay even more.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It's horrible, and I don't know. I mean, it just disappoints me when I
Mhm.
like to see higher bitrate stuff, right? You know, I use Tidal for premium audio, but I also like I run a Plex server, and the 1080p Blu-ray rips that I pull out of that look better than most
Mhm.
4K footage I see on Netflix, right? And so like watching 1080p Blu-rays at full quality is better than what we think of 4K and streaming, right? And that's just
Yeah.
like it's kind of disappointing.
You know what's not disappointing?
um, yeah, this is really not
Yeah,
disappointing, and you guys should all go do
Borderlands: The
this.
Handsome Jack collection is free on the Epic Store for the next week.
Awesome. Definitely go grab it. That is such a
Mhm.
good game franchise to play through. This includes number 2 and the
And
pre-sequel. Does
and
not
it
include number
includes
1,
the
correct?
DLC for both of those. Which
Yeah,
for
right.
Borderlands
So
2
you get the
alone, that's a
complete.
lot of content.
Oh, it's so much content. Borderlands, for those that haven't played it, does DLC right. So
Yeah.
definitely great to get the DLC if you can. And if you haven't played the franchise at all, I would recommend if you can go buy 1, which isn't very expensive, go buy it and play through that as well. But 2 was the best one. 3 is mostly, in my opinion, better than 2 was, but there's some toss-up stuff there. Definitely go play through 2. And
Yeah.
pre-sequel is just really interesting. So pretty awesome. So this is something I wanted to touch base on here that I'm really happy about, and I've actually been testing it out. So T-Mobile, they officially partnered with Google for RCS support. Now, for those that don't know, RCS stands for Rich Communication Services, and what it is it's what's supposed to replace SMS text messages for general public, and it's supposed to replace it based on phone number, based on an end-to-end kind of style, like SMS is, instead of you have iMessage, which iOS has had for a really long time and has been a big deal as to why some people stick with iOS and iPhone,
Blue
even if they're
Bubble.
interested in the other phones. Right. So RCS is what's supposed to help unify that, and it has some advantages over iMessage, and then obviously advantages over SMS. So I'll get into what
Yeah,
RCS
gotta
is
be
really
real
quick,
quick.
in a little more detail. So RCS is basically taking SMS where it's based on a phone number and it bounces through a server, but isn't necessarily stored on that server. But then enhances it with being faster, having higher data capability so you can send large messages, being able to see when it's delivered and when a message is read, being able to see when people are typing, and being able to send large photographs over RCS instead of having to use MMS. So the images are not compressed as much. You can send up to 105 megabytes right now is the default that the Android Messages app starts for. So overall, just really awesome. It's more like instant messaging, except that since it's based on a phone number and not stored on a server, you don't have to have an account. There's better data privacy than even iMessage, right? Now it's not end-to-end encrypted right now, but the hope is to change it to that in the future. So
I was going to say, I kind of beg to differ on it depends on the final implementation as far as data privacy, because right now SMS goes through a weird third-party company that like essentially nobody has ever heard of. And you can view you can view data on there if you work at a carrier, for example.
Right. So RCS avoids that. So two things. First, they're hoping to add end-to-end encryption. That is in the plan. That's not just like a speculated. Yeah, so that would fix it completely. But then the other but then the other aspect of it is that this data is not collected on a server. It is stored on the server until the server receives a delivery report from the other end and then completely wiped clean from the server, no backups or anything like that. So even if there was access to it, it'd be for a very brief moment, whereas SMS can be stored by your carrier for as long as you want. Now, this is specifically Google's RCS because the carriers, in particular Verizon and AT&T, could not decide on a universal standard. They wanted their own standard with their own texting apps because, of course, that's what they wanted to do. So finally, Google said, no, F you, we're just going to push your own version through, and T-Mobile agreed with them and partners with them.
Sprint actually had partnered with them, and T-Mobile bought Sprint, and so they kind of entered into that partnership already.
Yes, but T-Mobile had not started their own version to try and compete with Verizon and AT&T.
Samsung phones had RCS only from T-Mobile to T-Mobile already if you use Samsung's messaging app for a while.
But that was just something that T-Mobile was enabling, was run by Samsung, and I believe ran through their servers.
It was T-Mobile, not Samsung, that was running it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But they're going the right way now.
Well, at least they've gone in the right direction. Yeah. So now we have this. Okay, now all of a sudden T-Mobile and Sprint and obviously because they own them, and Google are all pushing for the same thing and hopefully pushing other carriers to do it. But T-Mobile is also allowing this to be cross-carrier. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstand this, but doesn't this mean that if you use Google Messages on another carrier now, as long as the carrier's not blocking it, you can communicate with it?
I think so, but I don't know enough of the technical details of this implementation to know for sure.
Okay. So it's at least a step in the right direction. So I'm really excited for it. I've gotten a lot of people to switch over to it.
But to be fair, you also make your family switch messaging
really
apps
loving
every week.
No, we haven't. I haven't made them switch messaging apps in like 6 years.
Okay.
I've never made them use anything.
You just talk about
no.
making them
I mean, I can. Yeah, I talk about options. I never actually like force it. But then this one, we were all interested enough to be like, okay, it has better features and better security because it's still more secure than SMS regardless. And when I was saying about better data privacy, by the way, just to be clear, is since it's based on your phone number, there is not information within there that necessarily defines who you are. And so even if that data is collected, which hopefully it's not, and hopefully end-to-end gets added because that's ideal, it's less likely to link back to you, right? So anyway, cool feature. I've been liking it. This next one, Philips Hue. You're the one that put this in here because I didn't really read a lot about it.
So there's some new leaks of a new version of their light strip and a new version of the Bloom light. The Bloom light is essentially just a brighter version of the Bloom light, and it has Bluetooth, which they are adding to pretty much all of their lights now. The light strip is the more interesting upgrade.
Thankfully.
So currently, for those that don't use Philips Hue light strips, it's the light strip itself is integrated with the box that controls power and data connectivity, and they are making it so that those can actually be disconnected. And so, for one, if let's say your Hue strip is defective within its warranty period, they could send you just the light and not the entire communication array, which would be cheaper for them to RMA.
Mine just
Yeah.
broke, so I would be
But then
happy
in
about that.
addition, potentially accessories could come out to connect in between, to add other functionality.
Yeah, which is
But I think
amazing.
the bigger upgrade for this new version of the light strip is that right now is
I agree.
the light strip. So it's a certain length, and there's certain points you can cut it. But you cut it, you obviously lose portion of the light strip you just spent $90 on. You're literally throwing it away. Well, with the newest version,
Yeah.
they're gonna be having essentially like a way to reconnect that. So you can, if you set it up for a desk now and you decide you want to change the configuration later, really the only issue you'd have at that point is the adhesive, which there are ways to deal with that. So,
Yep.
um,
Yeah, you can just
yeah.
peel it
So
off,
it's
use
just
other
a much
adhesive.
better upgrade. If you're considering buying a Hue light strip, just wait for these new ones. It's gonna it be a better experience overall. That's really it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually waiting to
Yeah.
get instead of replacing mine to wait for these. So really quick, video cards leaked a new super curved monitor from Samsung, which is interesting. I'll put an image up of it, but it's I don't know how exactly to describe it other than super curved. It's just a much tighter radius, and so you have this, like, it kind of wraps around you. And they did not write a full article that I could find about this or anything. It was just a tweet of a picture of Samsung has a hugging monitor. But for monitors, I like curves. I don't like them for TVs, but this could be kind of cool. So
Yeah.
all right. So then the next one is we saw a laptop that's coming out from Samsung that's going to have Intel Foveros, but we don't really have any information in terms of performance yet. So I don't even really care that much about reading the specifications of it because we don't really know what it's going to perform like because it's so different. It's a 5-core hybrid processor with Intel's 3D Foveros technology. And so I'm just like, okay, cool, interesting. I gotta really do a deep dive on it and understand all of it before I'm okay with saying this is a
Yeah.
cool feature or cool thing. But we'll see if Foveros is able to help
Mhm.
Intel on the laptop market. But I feel like that's the area they
Yeah.
don't need to worry about as much right now. Cough servers, cough HEDT. But anyway, and then another one that we actually have here from video cards is some Ryzen benchmark leaks, and I'll run down these really quick. But the Ryzen Pro series for the 4000 series has some benchmarks leaked. So there's the Ryzen 3, 5, and 7 Pro. It's the 4200G, 4400G, and 4700G. So they do have integrated GPUs, but the 3D Mark physics score was 13,000 for the Ryzen 3, 19,000 for the Ryzen 5, and 23,000 for the Ryzen 7. And then they also have a graphics score of 3,500, 4,000, 4,300 respectively. So potentially pretty good performance. And within that, we also saw what appears to be a Ryzen 3 4200G versus the 3200G performance. But I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because the chart actually doesn't really... Like, I don't know how much I trust it, basically, is what I'm getting at. But it looks like the 4200G is up to 57% faster, while GPU performance is lower, which is weird. I'd be really surprised if GPU performance is lower because I feel like CPU performance is not the issue that they have right now, but we'll see. And then final topic, speaking of Plex earlier, just something for those that may want to know. Plex is now has a watch together feature it's still in beta, but it's like Netflix where you can have multiple people watching the same show synced up and multiple people pausing it. So if somebody needs to get up and go do something, they don't have to be in the same room as you and be able to pause it or text you to pause it. They can just do it and it's fine. It'll show who paused it. They have not talked about any limits of how many people you can sync with or anything like that. There probably isn't any actually hard limit in place. But it's a beta feature, so it may have some issues. They're kind of warning about that. And it's only supported on Apple, so both iOS and Apple TV. Android, including Android TV, Fire TV, NVIDIA Shield, and Roku. So you can't use it on like LG WebOS right now, or like the desktop PC or Windows HTPC setups or anything like that. But they're just kind of wanting people to test it, see how it works. But their goal is to try and help people that are having to still kind of stay at home right now and social distance. So Do you have any other topics you want to add to
Since we had mentioned
the
Borderlands
tiny
earlier,
news?
the Legendary Collection is out on Switch. So if you want to play Borderlands on mobile, you should probably look at reviews and see how it performs, and then buy it if it's good.
Yeah, which I imagine is
So,
probably okay. Yeah,
but
so
yeah, that's it.
it's probably usable. All right. I think that covers everything, though, guys. Like we said, it was a little bit of a shorter podcast, about half the length of the last one. And just a little bit of a drier week, but we'll be back next week with more tech news for you guys. I don't want anybody
Yep.
here to have withdrawal, so
If the
I
announcement
hope this was
goes on the
enough.
day it's expected, then likely we'll be talking about PS5 next week.
Yeah, so we will actually
Yeah.
have a really big topic to talk about, so that'll be exciting. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and watch out for some interesting like regular video content to be coming out on the channel. I've got some cool stuff planned, so